Hello, this is Kristan Weisdack coming at you again for another wonderful interview, this time with mom, Talia Machlouf, all the way from California. So you and I got connected through a mutual, how can I say, mutual networking, I'll say, to make it the short answer of it. But you had worked for, you were in the celiac industry, right? You work for, tell me about your background in that.
Yeah, I worked for the Celiac Disease Foundation for 3.5 years. I was their director of research and advocacy. I actually started there as an intern right after I finished my master's in public health, which I started that program after my diagnosis. I wanted to sort of save the celiac world, right? So I got a master's in public health and then interned at the foundation and ended up working there.
Yeah, so tell people about your diagnosis. What exactly is that?
Yeah, it was probably 7 years too late, but better late than never. I started getting symptoms in high school, mostly gastrointestinal. They were manageable. Saw some doctors here and there, got some random inaccurate diagnoses. It got much worse as I was graduating undergrad, and I started losing a lot of weight very rapidly, and I could not really eat anything. And so I spent a lot of time at UCSF seeing different kinds of doctors, gastroenterologists, rheumatologists, PCPs, all the different kinds of doctors. And after probably, a couple years of doctor's visits and being on random medications and different kinds of diets, I ultimately started doing my own research, becoming my own advocate for my health because I was rapidly declining. I was 5'8" and 95 pounds. So very skeletal, skin and bones, really.
Right.
And nobody could help. So I did a lot of research and I ultimately asked for a celiac disease blood test. It's a very simple blood test. That's it, to get a diagnosis. And no one had thought to do that. And it was positive. So that started the journey to healing, which was 4 years, till I started to gain weight back and become like a real human again. And that's when I started my master's program in public health and wanted to get sort of into that field to help other people who were struggling like I was. And I worked for the foundation until 2018 when my first was born, and now I'm home with the kids.
So how long was it from the time that you self-diagnosed to changing your diet and feeling better? How long did that take?
Once I got the diagnosis, I went gluten-free right away. That's the only treatment for celiac disease. There's no drug or any other treatment other than dietary. And so I went gluten-free right away. It took a while, probably a couple years until I started feeling normal again, which is sort of normal, within the normal range for celiac disease. If you're that sick, it can take up to 2 years for your body to sort of get back on track.
Get rid of it.
Yeah. Depending on how sick you are, there's a lot of comorbidities that go with celiac disease, especially if you have been undiagnosed for so long. So I ended up with hypothyroid and gastroparesis and all these other comorbidities that I had to work through in addition to the celiac disease diagnosis that would sort of delayed the process. But of course, all interrelated.
So what tips, because I work with a lot of kids in early intervention, and a lot of people that are in the mental health space, what are some tips that you would have for them for going gluten-free?
It needs to be 100% and not partial or not mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Even just the smallest amount of gluten can really send your body off track. So 100%, if you're going to do it, you need to do it all the way and stick to a naturally gluten-free diet. A lot of the sort of gluten-free alternatives, gluten-free bread, gluten-free bagel, gluten-free processed food has other stuff in it to make it taste and feel like a gluten product that could wreak havoc on your body. A lot of things like xanthan gum and guar gum and all the different gums, and a lot of gluten-free alternatives tend to have more fat and sugar added to make up for the taste, because gluten-free products tend to not taste as good as the regular stuff. So it's also cheaper to go to be naturally gluten-free as much as possible. So obviously everybody wants a sandwich. Sometimes everybody wants to have those to feel normal with those gluten-free alternatives. So just keeping those to a minimum. It's going to be better for your wallet. It'll be better for your gut. It's also easier because gluten-free products are not always easily accessible. So, fruits and vegetables, whole foods, fruits and vegetables, rice, different kinds of ancient grains are all gluten-free. It's sort of the sneaky stuff that you have to watch out for, but also educate yourself on where hidden sources of gluten come from. A lot of people don't know that soy sauce has gluten in it. A lot of people don't know that licorice is made of wheat starch. So just educating yourself on where gluten is so that you can really be 100%.
Yeah, it's a lot of education around knowing where those hidden things are, but also finding foods. I found for our family, finding foods that taste good and that have a good texture.
Right.
Because some gluten-free products are like cardboard, right? So it's all about shopping the market. One of the breads that our family enjoys the most, it's called, I want to say it's called Canyon
Bakehouse.
Canyon Bakehouse.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what we buy too.
Yes, I love some Canyon Bakehouse. That is really good. What are some of your other favorite brands?
BeFree has good bread. And I think at least our Costco carries it. Some Costco's carrying it, making it cheaper, right? I think like it comes in a pack of 2 loaves at Costco, and it's like $8 or something, whereas normally a single loaf is like 7 or 8. So BeFree. Bread, let's see, bagels. I haven't found a good bagel, really. A lot of the companies make them, but they
not so much.
Always support your local gluten-free shops if you have one. They tend to be the best products because they're fresher.
Yeah.
And you always want to support your local people who are, especially the gluten-free people. And now they're becoming more common. The gluten-free stuff has come a long way since even when I was diagnosed back in 2011. So try to support your local gluten-free shop if you have one. In terms of other products, Udi's is a really big one.
UDIs, right? UDI?
Yeah, it's a really big one. It's probably the most accessible. I would say their muffins are good. Also just full of sugar though. Just probably why they taste good. Yeah, Udi's is really, which company I actually really like is Enjoy Life. They are allergen free. So I think they're free of the top 8, if not more, which is great for gluten-free and allergy-free families. And they're pretty accessible as well.
So working for the foundation, what would you say, people that are on this journey, what are some great resources for people to use for, like, if you have any tips for like recipes or just research in general, like some good websites? What did you do when you were thinking that you had these problems? Where did you go to, and what websites do you use now for resources?
Celiac.org, which is the Celiac Disease Foundation's website. I mean, I'm biased, but also it's like an extraordinarily comprehensive website. So much so that it's almost hard to navigate because there's so much information on there. But it's well organized. It's evidence research based. They do have recipes, a whole archive of recipes. They work with the top celiac disease researchers around the world, and so they post research. They have a symptoms checklist. So if you suspect that you may have it, or if you suspect that a family member might have it, you can take the symptoms checklist. They have a gluten-free meal plan. If you're just starting out on the gluten-free diet and don't really know where to start, the gluten-free meal plan is a really good resource. They've got I Cure Celiac, which is a registry, because celiac disease, there's no registry for celiac disease. So if you're diagnosed, if you're diagnosed with cancer, you get put in this cancer registry, right? So you know how many people around the world have this cancer. There's no such, and they have registries for many diseases. Celiac disease is not one of them. And so it's difficult to know how many people actually have it, how it's affecting different people. So the Celiac Disease Foundation, actually when I was working there, created this, helped to create this registry. And so people can log on and input their health data, which the researchers have access to, so that they can do studies on celiac disease, because there really wasn't a lot of studies being done on it, which is why there's no treatment and no cure. It's not that celiac disease is this new disease. It's been around for years and years and years, but there isn't enough research on it. And there isn't enough funding for celiac disease research. So the foundation is obviously nonprofit, and they help fund research through all these different, Harvard and the Mayo Clinic and all these institutions that do research. And they use the data from I Cure Celiac to conduct these studies. They also organize clinical trials. So there's like a recruitment center through the foundation that screens people who are eligible for specific celiac disease clinical trials to participate. And so a lot more trials are happening now, a lot more studies are being conducted. So we have a lot more information about the disease, which is great. So that is definitely an amazing resource. And that's where I lived when I first got my diagnosis, and still now.
So when you were trying to search for your own answers and be your own advocate, what made you think celiac? What led you to that?
It must have just been what I was punching into Google. Also, my mom had been gluten-free for years and years and years and years. She never got a diagnosis. She just felt better without gluten and dairy and soy and many other products. She never got a diagnosis. My grandfather was the same. For his whole life, the only thing he could eat was potatoes and Coke or something like crazy.
Yeah.
He's 90 now and he survived, but ultimately we determined that it's genetic. So still, you can pass it down to your kids. So eventually I'll have to get my kids tested too. Grandfather has it, my mom has it, I have it. I'm pretty certain my brothers have it, but they don't want to get tested because God forbid they have to change their diet. Men are a lot more difficult to convince.
Yes, they are.
And they'd never go to the doctor, so they would never find out anyway. But yeah, there's so many different, there's over 200 symptoms. There's over 200 known symptoms of celiac disease. So it can present so differently in so many different people. So it never occurred to me or my parents that I may have it, because my symptoms looked entirely different from my mom's, and hers looked entirely different from her dad's. And so one person with celiac disease can maybe they just have headaches, maybe they get migraines all the time, and so their doctor has them on Excedrin or whatever, they're treating the symptom, they don't treat the underlying cause. And so one person may have headaches and one person may have Hashimoto's, which is a comorbid condition with
Mhm.
celiac disease. And so it can look so, which is why it can potentially be difficult to diagnose. However, that's not really an excuse because it's just a simple blood test. Why don't you just
Right.
run the blood test in case?
Well, that's a good point to bring up because I think we need to talk about the autoimmunity, right? You're talking about Hashimoto's and eczema and all these other things when it's really, I mean, two things, right? There's autoimmunity when you have leaky gut because you get this inflammation, you get this, the barrier cells in your stomach separate and you get all these things, viruses and bacteria, long chain amino acids from gluten or dairy proteins or whatever getting into your bloodstream. They go to other places where they really shouldn't be. And your body can't differentiate between the long chain amino acids of gluten and the long chain amino acids of your own body. So that's the basis for autoimmunity. It starts attacking itself. One thing that I stress too when I do trainings with parents and professionals and daycares and things, we talk about simply looking for like allergy shiners and that Denny Morgan fold, because one of those is one of the symptoms, right, can be that you have those allergy shiners, which is just like you look like you have black eyes, and then that extra little fold under the eye. So, but that's, I think, is a great resource too, that we can get more people talking about and doing, signing up for the registry and going up through the checker to see. Because I have, when you say that, one of the kids that I work with in early intervention just today, that they got blood tests and they know that he has to be gluten-free and dairy-free, but the whole family hasn't converted. And so it's causing a little bit of problems, if you will, because he's still having issues with transitions. He's still having issues with like little behaviors here and there. And I kind of checked in with the family today and they said, well, we're kind of, not everybody is, we're letting him sneak a little bit. And I said, well,
Right.
that can cause inflammation in his brain and that's going to cause problems with these things. And so, I mean, it can be a big undertaking to go gluten-free completely. So one of the things that we talk about is just starting with like breads and pastas and kind of just making it a gradual process. But like you said, it takes a while to see that difference. So, I mean, once you have that definitive answer, I think it's just a matter of sticking with it,
Right.
and trusting that process. What are some of your favorite recipes? I guess if you could share your top like 2 recipes, let's say, what would those be?
I have a sweet tooth. So the first one that comes to my head is there was a it was a New York Times chocolate chip cookie recipe that I just it was it called for regular flour. It wasn't a gluten-free recipe, but I just made it gluten-free using gluten-free flour and whatever other alternatives I had to use. And everyone, they're like the best cookie ever, even though they're gluten-free. And I also make them dairy-free because I can't have dairy and my kid can't have dairy. And no one knows they're gluten-free. Everyone thinks they're like the most amazing cookie ever. And I found it on Pinterest, I think. It came up on my Pinterest. It's the New York Times chocolate chip cookie recipe that I just made.
Nice.
Gluten-free. I found that a lot of the time you can just use regular recipes and convert them to gluten-free and it's fine. Sometimes it doesn't work. Yeah. Gluten-free flour doesn't, especially in baking. Gluten-free flour does not behave at all like wheat flour or white flour. There's also cake flour, like gluten cake flour, and there's self-rising flour, and there's all different kinds of gluten flours that we don't have alternatives for. We just have all-purpose flour. And it's not all-purpose flour.
Yeah.
You can't use it for everything. So you do have to find recipes that can easily be converted. Otherwise,
but I think the one thing, like you said, is forming a good relationship with your local gluten-free stores, because ours has a bakery and like they bake their own stuff right then and there. But they teach you about those things too. Right. It's like the 1-to-1 flour, right? Because there's some recipes she's like, yeah, I have to use like 6 different flours to make it come out right. If you've had a good relationship with them.
They sell their flour concoction.
Yeah.
It's expensive, but it's probably better than what you buy at the store. And then you're supporting your local people. That's a good, they're happy to talk about their process.
Oh yeah.
It's their passion. That's why they're doing it. So
Do you have any like gluten-free groups out where you are? Because we have a group on Facebook. It's called Gluten-Free Pittsburgh. So are there like other support systems that you use, or like?
The Celiac Disease Foundation used to have a chapter, like a chapters around the country sort of program. What was it called? I don't even know. It was a chapters and support groups.
Oh, okay.
For years and years and years, they had these chapters and support groups around the country that would meet once a month and talk about whatever they wanted to talk about, the different struggles they're going through. Or, I found this gluten-free product. I found this gluten-free recipe. They started to really decline in their numbers as gluten-free products became more widely available, and as people became more educated, and as the restaurants started offering more gluten-free products. We didn't need the chapters and support groups because the information was out there. There was a lot of resources available. There was a lot of gluten-free food available. It was easily accessible. And so they closed the chapters and support groups part of the foundation because it just wasn't necessary anymore. And I found that also there used to be a support group up in Northern California that I would go to, and they have since closed as well for years ago. Because it just wasn't necessary anymore. People didn't need to meet in person to talk about their gluten problems because it was so widespread. People were more knowledgeable about it. And even though like it was a fad diet, that was sort of a double-edged sword. And it probably is still considered a fad diet. But it helped in terms of more products being available, more restaurants offering gluten-free food. It hurt because people wouldn't take it seriously. People wouldn't take those who actually needed gluten-free products for medical purposes. We wouldn't be taken seriously because some people would come in and be like, oh, I'm gluten-free because it's Tuesday or whatever. I'm gluten-free for breakfast. Because it was a fad diet and people thought, oh, it's going to help me lose weight. No. Oh, it's going to, I don't know, make me smarter. No, like people had these crazy ideas about what it could potentially do. It can help you lose weight if you just don't eat the carbs, but that's not a gluten-free diet. That's just a carb-free diet, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the fad diet thing was a double-edged sword. But yeah, we found that it's not necessary to have these sort of in-person. There are Facebook groups, like you mentioned. I know of one. I think it's called Gloriously Gluten-Free or something. And that's a place where people come and talk about challenges or learning when they're first learning about the gluten-free diet. But I don't know really of any in-person stuff anymore.
Well, the one thing that you did mention was, speaking of places, is restaurants. That's the story that I want you to share that we had talked about when we first met, that you married a family that's much different from yours, and they basically changed the way that they did business. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a good story. I met my now husband back in 2014, and they were in the restaurant industry. His mom owned at the time maybe three restaurants in the Los Angeles area. And it's sort of a Mediterranean style Chipotle. So you go down the assembly line and there's shawarma and pita and laffa and all these different salads. And which is mostly naturally gluten-free, right? The Mediterranean diet is a very healthy, mostly naturally gluten-free food, aside from the pita and the laffa and tabbouleh salad. So when I met them, they didn't know really anything. Nobody knew what gluten was. Like, nobody knew what gluten was.
Yeah.
They didn't know about the gluten-free diet, but they knew I was gluten-free, dairy-free. And so my mother-in-law, so some of their stuff had soy sauce in it. Some of their stuff was fried, obviously in flour. They had, they obviously didn't have a dedicated fryer for any, for the French fries versus falafel, for example, that wasn't gluten-free, because they didn't know, and they weren't a gluten-free restaurant. And we started dating, and sort of things kind of like moved quickly, and they decided to make their entire restaurant gluten-free for the most part for me, all of their locations. And that required a ton of work. First, they had to educate their staff on proper handling of gluten-free stuff. They had to switch out their flour for gluten-free flour, which is far more expensive than regular flour. Anything that wasn't gluten-free in the restaurant. So they obviously still offered the pita, because that's like the whole point. Everyone goes for the pita. But it was, separate. And if you wanted something gluten-free, if the food on the line was contaminated, like which it usually is, because they would scoop the cabbage salad into the pita, and so the spoon would touch the pita, and that makes it contaminated for somebody with celiac disease. So the staff was trained that if you walk in and you tell them, oh, I have a wheat allergy, or oh, I can't have gluten, or oh, I have this allergy, they know to take from the back or wherever they keep their fresh, sort of untouched batch of the different salads, and put it on your plate. Same for everything, the hummus, anything that was potentially cross-contaminated, they would take from the back, or they would take from underneath where it hadn't been touched yet. They switched out, so they had fried eggplant, and so instead of frying it in regular flour, they would fry it in gluten-free flour. So they didn't need a dedicated fryer anymore, because everything that was fried was gluten-free. And the staff was trained on proper handling, because there was still gluten in the restaurant. So you can never really guarantee that it's 100% gluten-free. No restaurant can do that unless it's obviously 100% gluten-free restaurant. But you're not going to never eat at a restaurant again. So you take your chances, and they know, and you watch them. And now they have 3 chains, and I think 8 or 9 locations. And they are all equipped, and most of them are gluten-free. Wow. I mean, gluten-free friendly, I'll say that. Mostly gluten-free, aside from the bread. And the rest are equipped to accommodate sort of any allergy that you have. They really learned about not only the gluten-free diet, but all sorts of different allergies. And I help them along that. I helped them with their menu, and I helped them educate their team. It was really, really incredible. Thank God we got married, because otherwise I would have
that's a completely huge undertaking, and to think about what has to go into that. And I think it's so progressive. I mean, they changed for you because they loved you, but I think that's life-changing when you can find, as somebody that has to be gluten-free and dairy-free, to find a restaurant. It's like the clouds part and the sun shines through and the angels sing, because it's like you feel like you can live a normal life. Right. Because when you have to, so sometimes I have to like piecemeal meals together for us. So like, I know that I can get like, gluten-free baked chicken from one place, but they don't have buns. So if I want a chicken sandwich, I have to go to Eaton Park locally, because they have gluten-free buns, but they prepare them separately. And sometimes they'll give them to you still like frozen. Then you have to heat up, but that's okay. But at least they're starting to catch on. Right. So I would hope that more restaurants take the incentive that your in-laws did for people, because as that registry develops and people see how many people are really afflicted with this, and I think if we can create more awareness of people going to the celiac.org and looking at the symptoms checker, they will understand the connections and start to see them, right? Because it makes such a big difference how ill you were and how great you look now. I mean, you look very healthy. Thank God you were able to heal yourself, but then go on to help other people. So thank you for meeting with me this evening. I appreciate it after you put your kids to bed. So as our closing, is there any takeaway that you'd like to share with people that might be going through a similar situation?
Primarily to not take your doctor's word for everything, and be your own advocate, really, for your health. Do your own research. I know no doctor likes you coming into their office and being like, oh, well, I read on Google that blah, 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 blah. All the doctors hate that. But it doesn't really matter if what the doctor is doing for you is not working and you're not feeling better. You have to take it into your own hands, because, you know, doctors know as much as they know, and they don't know everything. And it's impossible to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to, if you're not feeling well with what is being handed to you, you got to figure it out on your own if you want to stay alive.
Yeah, or go and find a doctor who will listen. I mean, you have to really align yourself with, and that's the issue. That's one of the stumbling blocks we have in early intervention, is because some families go to a family doctor. They're not even being seen by a pediatrician for their kids. And so because that specialization is not even there, then you get some misinformation going back and forth. So it's about at least getting somebody at the foundation of it who will listen to you.
Right.
You know, if you're saying that you want certain tests run, or you think that this might be the problem, that they're going to at least explore that with you. And I think that's a big takeaway. That's great.
Yeah. And I think especially with autoimmune diseases, they tend to go underdiagnosed because they have such varying symptoms, and the symptoms can all look like this disease or that disorder or this, and completely miss the mark for what you actually have. And so I think it's really important to just keep asking, but be the squeaky wheel. You have to be that annoying person. And you have to say, well, I read this on Google, and they won't take you seriously, but get them to run the test, and then you'll have your answers.
Yeah. And I think one of the, to add to that point, is to ask your family members to say, do you have any special diet like you did with your mom and your grandfather? Like, do you not feel so great when you eat bread? Or like, do you not feel so great when you eat dairy? Like, because thinking about that genetic link, it's like, just start asking questions and trying to align yourself with people that are going to give you the answers and listen to you. So, all right. Well, I'm going to let you get back to your evening. I can't thank you enough for joining me, especially after you've put your kids to bed.
Of course, and it's so late for you.
Oh, it's all good. No worries here. No worries here. I appreciate you taking the time. Well, Talia, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.